My name is Miss Nancy, and I am so glad you're here with us today. As you remember, last week we found out that Paul finally, in the book of Acts, made it to Jerusalem. But even the believers in Jerusalem were afraid that there was going to be some bad trouble. And so they had convinced Paul that it would be a good idea to go and help those believers who had made some kind of a vow that they could go to the temple, and Paul would go with them, and Paul would be showing that, yeah, he believes in the traditions that the Jewish people have. Well, while he was at the temple, here come some people from another town, and they recognize who Paul is. And they are not happy to see him there, because they're some of those folks who don't believe in Jesus. They don't want to change away from these traditions. They want to keep things the same way, and they want to get rid of Paul. And they start a humongous big riot. People are fighting and carrying on some kind of bad. As a matter of fact, it was so bad that the Roman soldiers were called in to quiet the place down. And when they saw that it seemed like Paul was in the center of all of the commotion, they arrested Paul and put him in chains. Now, if you remember, Paul's mama was Jewish, but Paul's daddy was Greek. And Paul learned how to speak the Greek language when he was growing up. And that's the kind of language that the Roman soldiers and their commander spoke. So as they are leading, the soldiers are leading Paul away, he speaks in Greek to the Roman commander, and he says, "Would you give me a chance to talk to these people? Maybe I can settle them down." Well, of course, the Roman soldier liked that idea really well. And so he said, "Okay, I'll let you do that." And so as they walked him up the stairs some way, so he was kind of above the crowd and he could speak very well to them. And he started telling them, the whole crowd, about how he used to be one person who would go out and he would get all these believers and arrest them and take them to prison, until that day that he was on his way to Damascus. And if you remember what happens on that road to Damascus, there was a great big bright light that came down and it shone on Paul. And Paul all of a sudden heard a voice that asked him what in the world he was doing, persecuting him. And Paul didn't know who that was. And he said, "Well, who are you?" And the voice said, "I'm Jesus, and you're persecuting me." And all of a sudden, Paul was struck blind. And then do you remember that they had to lead him into the city of Damascus by his hand, because he couldn't see where he was going. He was blind. And that fellow by the name of Ananias came and prayed for him, and then Paul could see. And then Paul suddenly realized that Jesus really truly was the Messiah, that everything that the believers had been saying about Jesus was true, and that Jesus was alive, because how could he talk to him if he were dead? And that he was up in heaven. And oh my goodness, it changed Paul's life. And when he told this to the people, when he got to the part about that God told Paul, "You are to go to preach to the Gentiles," the crowd went crazy and it just exploded into a riot again. What a mess. Well, you know, in the Old Testament, the prophets talked about the fact that the Gentiles would be in God's family one day. The Jewish believers knew that because Paul was telling them that. But the people who were the Jewish folks who didn't want to believe in Jesus, they didn't remember that. They wouldn't hear that. They were like, "No, this is not God's plan. Paul, this is what you want to say, and we don't want to believe it." But it was really God's message, wasn't it? God was the one who wanted the people to know this. And God's whole plan from the very beginning was that he would send Jesus to die on the cross for our sins and then raise him from the dead. Great plan, wasn't it? Well, do you see, God is protecting Paul by having the soldiers arrest him and get him out of the middle of that riot. Because somebody could have killed him in the riot, but they didn't, because the soldiers arrested him. You know, sometimes it looks like things aren't going well, but God's working behind the scenes to make things work out. And that's why our big idea for today is God protects us no matter what's happening in our lives. We only need to trust Him. Pretty good, huh? Well, I'm so glad you were here today, and I'm looking forward to seeing you next week. Bye.